IVM.
I'm not really a fan of history, but start talking about food and I want to know all of it. Where the dish came from, how it has evolved over time, and even how it can be adapted for local palates today. Food is the backbone of all Parsi celebrations, and for a migrant culture like ours, it is an integral part of our story. Today, on the very first episode of Not Just Dhansak, I talk to archaeologist and food historian Kurush Dalal and uncover the stories and history behind some of the most iconic Parsi dishes. We talk about his mom Katy Dalal and how she pioneered the Parsi catering business. Kurush also shares some really funny stories about what goes on inside Mumbai's renowned Parsi gymkhanas. This is Not Just Dhansak, and now let's chat with food historian and entrepreneur Kurush Dalal. Hi Kurush, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hi Perzen, thank you for having me here.
Yeah. So, in his own words, Kurush runs a small artisanal catering business called Katy's Kitchen, which is actually nothing but small because his mum, Katy Dalal, was one of the pioneers of Parsi food in Bombay when it started. So, Kurush, could you share a little bit more about your background, about how, Katy Auntie started her catering business and how it's sort of evolved over the years?
So Katy basically had absolutely no clue that she was ever going to be a caterer. She started off by wanting to be an Egyptologist, realized that Egypt was a little far away and decided to settle for Indian archaeology of the same period. She was one of the first women to carry out independent excavations in India. She worked on the Indo-Pak border. She did a PhD on the pre-Harappans. She got married on the way to doing that, had me, and then finished her PhD, wrapped it up and found that there was absolutely no place for women in archaeology in India. Women were considered the fairer, more delicate sex, and therefore they had, men wouldn't just envisage a role for them.
Right.
She tried teaching history in Bombay at, what would now be the high school level, and realized that this was just not what she wanted to do. She'd spent a lot of time traveling with my father. My father was a shippy, and had got a very good chance to sample food all over the globe and realized that there was so much more to food than just the food that we knew. And her cooking was very popular with family functions and, potlucks and things like that. And the catering business came about purely by accident. We had a close family friend who moved very far away from VT to Andheri. In those days, Andheri was absolutely the backside of beyond.
Yeah.
And would keep popping over from his office in Balatpur to have lunch with us because he couldn't stand canteen lunch.
Right.
He then convinced my mother to send him a dabba which he'd pay for. 15 days later, he was back with two of his office colleagues saying, look, you got to give them dabba also because I'm starving. They're eating my dabba. She never looked back. She was one of those few people who, once she decided that she was going to get up and go, she got up and go and really went. So in a matter of a few years, she was sending a very large number of tiffins out of VT. At that time, there was still a lot of Parsis in South Bombay. And she was offering something a little different. She was offering food that was not just Dhansak.
Yeah.
And this really worked out for her. And then a very close friend of ours came over and said, look, my son's having his Navjot. And I don't want any of the Parsi caterers to cater for me. Even the two of them are my relatives.
Wow.
Will you do it?
That would be such a great break, right? I mean...
Yeah, but
and scary
it was an incredibly scary break because his mom said, sending food out for 30, 40 people in handis to your house is one thing.
Yeah.
Sitting and doing the whole thing is a different thing. He said, I know everything. I know everybody. I'll get you in touch with all of them. I was about 7 or 8, I think, at that time.
Yeah.
And I remember very distinctively walking around with a little Agfa Click 3 camera, probably burning through a whole roll of very expensive film in those days, wondering what in God's name my mother had got herself into. And she never looked back. I think it was about 3 or 4 years after that she was managing a club. She was managing another club. At some point, she was managing 4 clubs in Bombay together.
Wow.
Which was very manic. But one of them was purely temporary. One of them was to help somebody out.
And considering the kind of people who come to these clubs, we'll get to that. But that's quite an achievement too.
And then she started doing a lot of buffets.
Right.
Because she hated standing behind somebody in line to eat. When somebody's eating or standing over their shoulders, and hated even more somebody standing over her shoulder.
Yeah.
She also felt that Parsi catering basically shortchanged the vegetarians. And she was a preferential vegetarian. So she said, let's do a buffet. And she tried it out on a few clients who trusted her. And this really caught on. She was the first person to introduce the Parsi community to buffets and say that, there's much more than regular Parsi food that you can do if you do a buffet. And she never really looked back. She made it a point to keep forging forward when she was threatened by the mukaddam of the waiters. That, if you don't raise my fees, I won't bring my men. She said, don't. I'll manage without you.
Yeah.
And she asked me to call my college friends in, and about 10 or 12 of us actually served an entire 300-person function at Kolaba Agyari.
Oh, wow.
And she swore that day that she was not going to do Patra again as long as she ran the business.
Yeah.
And she just switched completely to doing the buffet system.
Yeah.
So in that way, she was very innovative. She brought a lot of salads and what we call continental food, which is not eaten on the continent.
We're going to get to the salads bit because there's an interesting story here between me and Kurush and the salads.
So, she just never looked back at things. She was not one of those people to fall back. She ended up writing 6 books.
I know. So one of my earliest memories about Katy Auntie is, so just to give some context, my dad used to be a wedding photographer. So he used to end up meeting Katy Auntie quite a lot at the functions. And back then there was nothing social that kids could do. So I used to go with dad to his functions and hang around. And Katy Auntie would always sneak me some rumali rotis and give me some wafers while my dad was sort of giving me like the evil glare from the other side. But when I got married, my mum, she was really worried because obviously I was moving from New Zealand to India and I knew absolutely nothing about Parsi food. So she actually bought me 3-4 of Katy Auntie's books, the Jamwachalogy, the second one. And she was like, at least, please just take this with you. Like, read it on the flight, do something. Like, please learn at least 3-4 things. You can't have your husband going hungry. You are staying in a joint family. People will talk about my upbringing and blah, blah, blah. So for me, her Jamwachalogy book specifically has a lot of those sort of happy memories associated with it.
So Jamwachalogy, I have to take credit for the name. Huh?
Acha.
So the name was, that only contribution to that book by me was the name. Okay, and when she wrote that book, it was much more than just a book that she was writing. So it wasn't like there were no Parsi cookbooks around. There were.
Yeah.
She felt that they were very unwieldy.
Yeah.
She also felt that books needed to have color pictures.
Yeah.
And that, food was something that you couldn't see in black and white.
Yeah.
And definitely not in text. And if you weren't being able to speak to the people about the food, then the pictures needed to speak for you.
Yeah.
So that was one part of it. The other was also documenting in her own way her story of food.
Yeah.
So she'd spent a lot of time with her great-grandmother in her great-grandmother's kitchens in the villages of Gujarat, learned how to cook as a child, and very shamelessly would say that, anybody can be a decent cook, but great cooks are born.
Right.
You either got it in you or you don't got it in you. Yeah. And there's no shame to that. You need to move on and do something that you're born for.
Yeah.
So that book was with great trepidation that it was released. Some of those recipes we had never eaten at home. And my dad was very worried. And I can remember telling my father that, you've got to understand one thing. Katy Dalal is one of those few people who can cook in her head.
Yeah.
She knows when she's adding stuff together exactly what it's going to taste like.
Yeah.
If she says she ate this when she was 16 and she's replicating this at 56, take my word for it. It will be seamless. So a couple of things that he found a little odd, he actually made her cook. And we were very excited to eat those things,
Yeah.
I still remember there's this dish which is very popular now. I cater regularly to clients. It's called Malai Ma Kolmi.
Huh.
It's prawn.
I've had that one. That's a very interesting one because the first time I heard about it was the first time I read about it was in that book, and I've never actually seen anyone cook kolmi with
clotted cream.
Yeah.
I still remember Manchi Kama when he was inaugurating the book, called it Heart Attack on a Plate.
Yeah, but that's a lot of Parsi.
Yeah. But see, the Parsis seem to thrive on cholesterol.
So we have a joke in our family that, if we go out and obviously we will overeat, and they'll be like, okay, now if we're going for dessert, we might as well have the cardiologist on backup. Okay, directly, can we just come to Parsi General, Cool. So, you spoke about Katy Auntie, doing catering for a lot of gymkhanas. And even today, a lot of the Parsi caterers who are around start off as doing dabbas or start off as catering to these gymkhanas. But like we were talking about, the clientele at these Parsi gymkhanas is a little bit special, shall we say.
That is a very, very nice way of putting it.
So I know, I'm not going to name the gymkhana, but I know one caterer who ended up leaving because someone told him, last week the brun pav was like 2 inches by 2.5 inches. Ne gaikale the brun pav you gave me was, it was actually 3 inches by 2 inches. So how come you gave me like a smaller brun pav last week? And, this is not right. And how can you still charge me the same amount for this smaller brun pav? So, what would be your, since you've also done this, what would be your...
We've had some amazing instances like this. I still remember a very kind gentleman so we were catering at a club which shall remain unnamed. And they had a very peculiar penchant for half portions.
Yeah.
So we were doing bumla, Bombay ducks in season, and you had to give 3 bumlas in a half portion. And it was ridiculously underpriced because club food is cheap.
Yeah.
And so 3 bumlas were sent out. He came back with 1. And he said, you see, the other 2 of the same size and larger. This one is smaller. Please replace it or give me a refund. We decided to comp the whole thing for it and made it very clear to him we were never going to sell him another bumla. But that was at least perhaps one of the simpler solutions.
Yeah.
I still remember when I took over catering and at a club, and I was newly married and I had my wife in charge of the cash counter, saying, it's a family business, you got to be in on it too.
Yep.
Throw her into the deep side of the pool straight away. And one of her new waiters came in, scratching his head with a little plastic bowl in his hand, pink tissue paper in it, and 2 eggs sitting in it. And he said, "Wo kya hai na, wo madam, wo anda, wo 1 minute wapas aata hu." So my wife Ria was completely gobsmacked about somebody was bringing their eggs to the kitchen. So he came back to say that lady's friend had a heart problem and she wanted to eat an omelette sandwich, and that this omelette sandwich should be made using these cholesterol-free eggs and that our eggs, which we would have used in our omelette, should then be replaced in this box so she could sell them back to her banya.
Okay, that has to be the strangest one. I was going to talk about someone who actually talked about, they came to the caterer and said, but like the 1 cheese slice costs 8 rupees and you are actually charging me 20 rupees for adding cheese to the sandwich. So what is this? So finally the bichara caterer got frustrated and said, just bring your own cheese and add it into your sandwich.
Oh, but that also happens. You never give away something like that. You never give ground like that. That is asking to be invaded. I had a beautiful bunch of customers, 5 of whom would meet in the afternoons at a club that I catered to and call for 1 pot of tea.
Yeah.
1 pot of tea. Very strong, not stirred.
Okay.
Then they would ask for a pot of hot water and make a second pair of cups out of it.
Wow.
Then they would ask for more hot water and get a 3rd cup out of that, a 5th cup out of the damn thing. So, I thought this was really pushing their luck.
Yeah.
So when we renewed our contract for the next year and prices, I slipped in gently 1 pot hot water, ₹5. So since it was not an upgrade on any price, it was quietly passed off. And then waited for the next time they came and charged them 10 rupees extra in their name. There was pandemonium. Letters were written. There was great indignation. These poor ladies had been forced to pay money for hot water.
Yeah.
And, they would have to now ask for their stipends to be increased from their children. And this would be criminal. And one of those ladies would be driven up in a chauffeur-driven BMW. The other in a Mercedes. One came in a Baleno. I mean, she must have been really poor. And one of them walked because she lived 2 buildings away.
Okay.
So you get my picture, right? So I said, I'm sorry, but it's in the menu.
Yeah.
Next week, they brought hot water in their own thermos.
What? So, moving on from gymkhanas, one of your mainstays of your business today continues to remain sending out the Parsi dabbas, if I'm not mistaken.
So dabbas make up a small portion of the business. Daily orders make up a small portion. Parties, corporate orders make up a slightly larger portion. The dabba business has changed because the dabbawala normally is on a cycle.
Right.
There's only that far that he can go. And the Parsi audience has now moved to a large scattering in the suburbs, all the way from Vikhroli on one side, Ghatkopar, Borivali, Andheri, Santa Cruz, So it becomes impossible to send dabbawalas there.
Yeah.
You need a minimum of 5 to 6 dabbas for somebody to take them in a train and make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because train, bus, changing trains, and then everybody wants their lunch to come in by 1 o'clock.
Exactly at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly at 1 o'clock, and not at 12:30.
Yeah.
So,
I've had someone. So there was a very short period of time where I did where I did dabbas, and then my husband told me, "You're pregnant now. You need to leave it, or you might miscarry from the high pressure." So I had a client who would call me at like 1:02. Like if the dabba hadn't come, it was like a crisis because I had promised that latest it would come by 1 o'clock.
And she'd probably call in the dot of 1.
Yeah. She called exactly at 1 that it's not yet come. But my favorite story is actually I had a client who I think there was some mutton curry on the menu that day, and he called me to check in the morning that the mutton I was using, was it from a male goat or was it from a female goat? And he really legitimately wanted me to call my butcher and check with him quickly before I sent out the dabba for the day, because he was not sure he could have had the the more tougher male goat. So what is your maybe one of your crazy stories? Because after this, this was one of my highlights of my dabba experience. After which I decided that
Perzen, you got out of it too quickly. You would have had so many more stories to tell. So Parsis are very quirky clientele, and that's the fun part of working with them also. It's never a dull moment. So I still have this major bugbear of clients regularly saying things to me like, "You'll use good fish, no?" And in my early days I'd say, "Of course, madam."
Yeah.
Now I say, no, ma'am, we only use bad fish. In fact, if we don't get bad fish, we buy good fish and put it on the roof for a couple of days and then use it. Then there's this stony silence for a couple of seconds, and then there'll be a, embarrassed giggle and "You are so funny, Mr. Dalal." Really, if I was going to use bad product, would you keep coming back to me?
Yeah.
And what kind of a caterer in his right mind would tell you, no, I'm using bad products. I'm not using good products.
Yeah.
So, this happens. It's part of the deal. Clients also, have their own fears. They have their own apprehensions.
Yeah.
They're giving you their menu, their food, their party is in your hands. If the food is bad, this is a Parsi thing.
Yeah.
If the food is wrong, everything else could be right, but hell is to pay.
Yeah. So, in addition to all the stuff that you do, you also have, you call yourself a dino blogger, because you were one of the few people who started blogging back before blogging was actually a thing. So I was going through your blog, and a lot of your posts sort of have, I'd say they're not educational, but they have a lot of backstory about it. So I read this basically this post about "My name is Pateti," which was why one of your really famous
that
posts,
viral,
which I actually thought about just yesterday, because some website put out some article about pateti in March, and I was just like, you have done zero research. I'm just taken 3-4 words.
So I've actually had my own article sent back to me.
Oh.
By well-wishers saying, "Have you read this?" Without my name at the bottom. I'm like, thank you.
It went on WhatsApp. It went
thank
viral
you,
on
thank
WhatsApp.
you very much. It's very nice, but if you cared to check, I'm the guy who wrote it. So that one went well. It was called, I think, "My name is Pateti, and I'm nobody's new year."
Yeah.
So, the whole point was, that was angst. Too many years of being wished happy pateti, and not just pateti, papeti, which means tiny potatoes.
Yeah.
So why would anybody wish somebody happy baby potatoes? But so I remember getting in touch with a very important Maharashtrian almanac, and telling them that they've got pateti written in place of New Year. And that they should change it. And they said, we've always written it. I said, "You've always been making a mistake. Perhaps it's time to change." And the younger management now in place said, it's a good idea. Perhaps it's time to get the right thing into place.
Yeah.
And they did. And I was so thrilled that, one could be the change.
Yeah. Great.
So the whole point of the blog actually was the blog was written for the wrong reasons. So there's this great bloggers potluck dinner that happened every 3 months. And you could only go there if you blogged. So my wife said, look, I can't take you if you don't blog. So kicking and screaming, I decided to start blogging. And I probably blog the least of all bloggers in the world. I really need to have, an urge to write, to say something, to blog. And I don't see I see my blog as an extension of what I want to say. So if I don't have anything to say, I won't just blog on principle. I have great awe of people who have something to say every day. I know bloggers who blog twice a day.
Yeah.
A lot of bloggers blog every week. I find that, peer pressure, like, oh my God.
That's my major problem with social media, because I always feel like I have nothing intelligent to say. So like, I always struggle with Twitter, where you're supposed to like have 7 to 10 different things intelligent to say in like one single day. And I'm just like, there's nothing interesting happening in my life today.
I've learned to take social media at my pace.
Yeah.
This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I put out because I want to.
Yeah.
And tough.
Cool. So getting into, a little bit about Parsi food, do you think as caterers, our role is also a little bit to educate people? I mean, so I'll explain what I mean here. You, I think last year or the year before, did a dish called Tadino Butterwo. Now, you also did a post around it and things. But the reality is, how many people today would choose Tadino Butterwo over like berry pulao, if you did not like sort of tell them about it? So do you think we have a role here to play where we need to tell people what it is? Do you think people even care, or do they just want to like go have berry pulao?
This is going to be a major, threnody from the heart kind of thing on my part. But what's happened is, what attracted me to doing this podcast with you was the name of the podcast. And I love my Dhansak, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But what has happened is the Bombay Parsi has forgotten maybe 80% of the variety of the food that Parsis traditionally ate.
Yeah.
And I remember that was one thing that I didn't really realize, because I had my mother and her mother who all came from Gam.
Yeah.
They were village Parsis technically. So, I mean, though my mother was from the village of Bandra, which today is very difficult to say, but so they did a lot of stuff that, we Bombay people didn't, Kotna Parsis didn't.
Yeah.
And it was only many, many years later that I realized there's actually a difference between the food of the Bombay Parsis and the Salsette Parsis. There's that much variation in it. So when one actually started investigating the issue, there were a lot of things. So many Parsi dishes are vegetarian dishes with a little bit of meat in it, a little bit of chicken, a little bit of prawns. Because the Parsis like the ramakras.
Yeah.
They're toys in their food. And I found that so many of those dishes were incredibly delicious.
Yeah.
And we just weren't eating them. So, yeah, completely, I think it's our job as caterers, as, as the custodians of the food heritage of the community.
Yeah.
To innovate on the one hand, but to also keep yanking out things from the closet every now and then and throwing them out. So the Tadino Butterwo purely happened because I wanted to make traditional bhakras.
Okay.
And I had a new dabba delivery boy who came from Vasai. So I asked him whether he'd get me good early morning tari without any water in it. And he got me a couple of liters. And the next thing was, could you get 20 liters? So he said, Saab, hum ye dhanda nahi karta hai. So I said, nahi, dhanda nahi, just as a one-off. And that year for Navroz, we did Tadino Butterwo. And it was a surprising hit. And I'll tell you this, I had never eaten that dish before.
Oh, wow.
So this was one of those things that my mum talked about, my grandmom talked about, but we somehow never got around to making.
Yeah.
And when we made it, I understood exactly what my mother and my grandmother were talking about.
Yeah.
Of Gamni Tari and not this, piss water that you get called Tari in Bombay kind of thing. And I've had clients come back to me. The problem is sourcing good Tari for them.
Yeah.
So then in between the government banned Tari because there was a major adulteration thing. Then I had somebody who I consult with actually tell me, don't do it because technically it's alcohol and you don't have an alcohol license.
Yeah.
So I said, you actually think I've got to take a 15,000 rupee alcohol license to make 3,000 rupees worth of Tadino Butterwo? No.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
So things like this happen. Then it turns out, no, it's about literage and alcohol content and things like that. So there are a lot of norms and laws which you got to be very careful about.
Yeah.
But there are so many smaller dishes like, Titori Margi, which nobody does.
Yeah.
Then there is Gowar Singh Ma Kolmi or Goa Sima Ambar, which nobody does. And I don't know why. But I get a lot of clients who come from overseas who are coming after 30 years, 40 years,
Yeah.
They're coming back to India. This is that one last trip to see everything before they're going to pass on from this world, which they don't. Then they're back another 2-3 years later because they missed that trip so much.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of this for them. And by default, I end up adding it to the menu, and therefore other people also try it. People are hesitant.
Yeah.
The typical Parsi wants his patrani machi, sali marghi, gosno palau.
Like
dal,
I really struggle
lemon
with
custard.
that, like if we have party orders and they'll tell me, you tell me what is best. So I'll, rattle off something like the Malaini Kolmi, which I've actually adopted and it's in my menu as well. Or, like we invented this Kidgosh Palau. And I actually had someone, so I had the Kidgosh Palau on my Nowroz menu. And it explains that it is just the mutton cooked in the Kajuni gravy. I still had one Parsi client call me at 9 o'clock in the night saying, but I checked the whole bag and there is no kidgoshni like gravy. And I was like, yeah, because it's inside the palau. Like you're not going to get separate kidgosh. But so...
that happens. A person, I had a client who once... So 1 year I did... I always have this problem about patrani machi. I don't do the small fish.
Yeah.
I like using the large pomfret, the traditional one. So there are 4 slices. One has a hole in it and one is a tail. The other 2 are what are called the middle pieces. So Parsis all want the tail piece. I try to explain to them that there's only one tail in a pomfret. You can't have that many tails.
But I think caterers today have given up on this. So if you go to a wedding, there are only tail pieces, or they just give you just the pomfret, like the whole small tiny pomfret.
Yeah, but the tiny pomfret doesn't have any taste. And we're depleting stocks if we're eating all the kids, right?
Yeah.
Let's eat the adults.
Yeah.
So 1 year I decided to fillet my pomfrets. So 4 fillets to a pomfret, 4 slices to a pomfret. I had a very irate customer call me up and tell me, I have been cheated. So I was like, sorry madam, what happened? No, there were no bones in my fish. So I thought she was joking. So I laughed and said, is that so sweet of you? She was not joking. She was dead on serious. You see, I had cheated her and I had sold off the bones. So forget about incurring extra cost of having the fish filleted and time wasted doing that. I had sold off the bones and I had defrauded her.
Who bought these bones?
I have no idea. And I had defrauded her. So that's when I decided no more fillets.
Yeah.
Unless the client asks for them upfront, no fillets. You get your fish on the bone.
So let's moving on from the craziness of Parsi clients. Let's talk a little bit about what is Parsi food. So I always struggle when people ask me this, because we've sort of over the years, I feel so I recently, I'd done this cooking show where I was talking about what is Parsi food, and I started off talking about the typical is Persian influences, Gujarati influences, our obsession with the British, so there's British influences and so on. And then we entered Grand Road Market and I was like, yeah, actually this is also a little Parsi and this is also a little Parsi. And if you added mutton to this would become Parsi. So he's like, so basically you just take anything you like and do a little here, there, and it'll become Parsi. So according to you, what is Parsi food?
Okay, so to put it in a nutshell, it's essentially the food of Persian immigrants, which is not modern Persian food. So a lot of people look at modern Persian food and say what's similar. It's Persian food from 1200 years ago. Coming to India and desperately adapting first to what is available here. So you don't have whitefish from the Caspian Sea being wrapped in vine leaves. You have pomfret being wrapped in banana leaves. But you can see those thin threads going back to a lot of Persian cuisine. Even the Dhansak, you can actually trace it back, even though the name is so Gujarati. To the ash and the muddled meat and pulse curries and things like that are eaten traditionally there. The main difference was it was a meat, dried pulses and wheat-based diet there. The diet here had a lot of rice in it. Also, the dals available to us here were different. The dals that were commonly used there were different. The herbs there were a little different. The herbs here were a little different. Dry fruits were commonly available there. They were not so common here, so they had to be used in smaller quantities. But again, things that were less available there, as in spices the way they are here, was so much more available here. And the Parsis perhaps were one of the first fusion cuisines, truly. So they fused seamlessly the Gujarati produce and style of food here with their style of food that existed. And this is the South Gujarat style. And they kept adapting. So having adapted once, I think adaptability of cuisine was the biggest thing that you can talk about in Parsi food. So when the British came, we looked at what they could offer us and said, yeah, this works for us, that works for us. Okay, this is good too. And yeah, they were the masters at that time. So, adapting a few of their things was always a nice way to cozy up.
Right.
But the major Portuguese influences that we don't realize, vinegar, for example, chilies, potatoes. I mean, potatoes for all Indian food.
Yeah.
But chilies so much as part of the Parsi diet, the way they enhance our food, our curries, things like that. Vinegars.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't make a good patrani machi without vinegar, can you? You can't pickle half the Parsi pickles without vinegar.
Yeah.
All
and
that
we
is
also
Portuguese.
use a very specific vinegar, which I remember I used it. I did a pop-up at a 5-star hotel, and I used it there, and I left it by mistake open in the because I was making something, so it was open, and the head chef came around, and he was like, "Who's having alcohol in this kitchen?" Because it just smelled so it just smells so strong, like desi daru type.
It's just basically sugarcane alcohol. The colas make it.
Yeah.
It comes from Navsari. That's also a big traditional thing amongst the Parsis.
Yeah.
I mean, I get mine wholesale from them, but most Parsis will go to Parsi shops in Bombay and specifically so. And there are 2 cola families that make vinegar.
Yeah.
So, there will be aficionados of this one and that one, and daggers will be drawn.
Yeah.
If you dare to suggest that they should look at the other one because the one they regularly buy is not available.
There's even like 2 Motilal masala walas, for example. Yeah. So there's huge fights. I had a client who called me and was like, where do you get your Dhansak masala from? She really did not care. Like most communities would be like, I have my own spice blend and my grandmom makes it. She just wanted to know, Baba, is it from Motilal, and also is it from the Grand Road nu Motilal? I hope it's not from the Tardev nu Motilal.
So, they used to all be part of one family. And then over time, families grow, businesses split into, sister concerns and things like that. So, and there is always, this is my shop versus that is not my shop.
Yeah.
I knew the owner here, I got better service here, I didn't get it there. So there was a time when I used to grind all my own masalas.
Right.
And then there was a time when we couldn't. So we did use Motilal masala for a long time. And I've always felt that the Motilal masalas are of very exemplary quality. And now I live next to a place where there are wholesale grinders who professionally grind for you. So now grinding my own masalas once again is such a joy.
Yeah.
So, it all depends like that. It depends upon quantity, and quality normally is good in most places that sell. So Parsis are, anal about quality.
Yeah.
Completely. So a Parsi will usually not go to a shop which sells them something substandard. And but they will still have their preference amongst the shops that they like also. So that's also part of the deal.
Yeah.
Their markets also, so I only buy my fish from so and so.
Yeah.
So in all those women there, if the right woman is not there, you will not buy fish that day because she wasn't there.
Yeah.
There's a little client loyalty, customer loyalty to the purveyors.
Sadly, that
like
doesn't exist as much today. I remember my grandfather used to take me to have this watermelon no sarbat, which you get at Grant Road. And we only used to go to that person, and we would only have it if the watermelon no sarbat no owner guy was there. If he wasn't there, then sorry, like today we'll just not have watermelon sarbat with our dhansak. But
So, I kind of grew up like that also. My grandfather had his favorite haunts. There was Jai Hind Cold Drink Center at Grant Road, which I think most people don't remember about. And that was an accepted place to go and have sherbet. The roadside was not good for sherbet. Watermelon juice was only to be drunk at Kayani's in season, when his hand chalked board saying watermelon juice available was put up. And if I asked for the mince at Kayani's, I would be told, no, shh, they use horse meat. Like really, like the Iranian Chilia restaurants would actually have access to so much horse meat. So that was one way of making sure that your kids didn't eat. I mean, this was probably preaching to the wrong press, but because I was most intrigued, if it was horse meat, I definitely wanted to eat it. I remember years later sneaking in to eat it and saying, this just tastes like mutton keema. What's the big deal about the horse meat?
So let's talk about this Parsi dish that we have called the Sasni Machi. So when I first taught my cook to make it, they all used to refer to it as like sasni machi, like mother-in-law's dish. And they even asked my mother-in-law, ki, like, you invented it, like, why is madam calling it sasni machi? But I was reading one of your articles which talks about how the sasni machi is actually the perfect kind of example of what the Parsi fusion food today you would call it. So could you share a little about that?
So it's actually sauce ni machi, borrowed from the British SAUCE, sauce. So essentially what you're doing is you're poaching a fish in bechamel sauce. But instead of the classic bechamel sauce, what you're using is either a rice flour sauce or a chana atta sauce, depending on which side of Gujarat you're for. And they'll fight about that too. To which you will add Portuguese vinegar. So you're using a sauce technique that's British. You're using a vinegar that's Portuguese. You're adding a fish that's completely west coast of India. And of course, because this is Parsi and this is Indian food, so there will be what we call jiru lasan marchu, which is a paste of chilies, garlic and jeera, cumin. So that'll be the main flavor in it. And then because you're Parsi, once again, you'll crack an egg and beat it into the sauce. So you'll make a proper sauce, a British sauce, a very English egg thickened sauce. And you'll steam your pomfrets in it. And then because you have to have a bit of Persia in it, you will sprinkle with an onion birista and fried garlic. Yeah. So you got everything. Yeah. Then if you want to get fancy, you'll probably cut a couple of tomatoes and, put wedges, large wedges stuck into it of raw tomato when you serve it. And that's the height of garnish as far as Parsis are concerned.
Yeah, that or kothmeer.
That's ubiquitous. You can put kothmeer on anything apart from your lagannu custard.
Yeah. Cool. So there is this, belief, you spoke about it earlier, which is actually wrong, but that most people feel that Parsi and vegetarian don't really go together. So I have huge, and I've noticed this in my business, there'll be like huge lulls in my Parsi business when, people are fasting, because they just feel that, like, if I'm serving them vegetarian food, then it mustn't be authentic. Like, I've had clients shout at me at Little Flea. They were vegetarian, but they were upset that I was serving a vegetarian dhansak because no such thing existed. And I was like, but you're vegetarian. This means you can eat it. No, they were most upset that I was doing something like that. But...
So that's like the veg burger conundrum.
Yeah.
If you can have a veg burger, I don't see why you can't have a veg dhansak.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a dhansak without the mutton in it. It's dhan and sak. Dhan is the rice, sak is the vegetables and dal cooked together. Technically, you can have a dhansak that's vegetarian.
Yeah.
Like technically, you can have, nowadays I hear you have veg fried chicken.
Yeah.
Which is a soya chicken of some sort.
And you did a podcast about Jain chicken.
Yeah, that was actually chicken, but cooked Jain style. So, the whole thing here is people having very close minds sometimes, number one. And eating of meat was aspirational. Meat, fish, chicken especially, Chicken was one of the most aspirational foods for a very long time, till about 70 years ago, when broiler chicken came into the business. And chicken for the price of mutton, oh my God, imagine how cheap. Today, chicken costs about somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 the price of mutton. And today, mutton is aspirational. Mutton in the villages could only be cut if there were enough people to eat the entire goat.
Right.
No refrigeration in those days, right? So, Parsi weddings and things like that were wall-to-wall mutton. There would be minimum 2, 3, even 4 dishes of mutton and nothing else in a wedding, and you just couldn't get enough chickens for a wedding, so it was impossible. But coming to Bombay, not having access to the daily fish, fish became an important part of wedding food. Similarly, chicken was something that, you were rich enough. And Bombay's markets regularly had mutton because there were so many buyers on a daily basis.
Right.
So, the aspirations changed. And eating of meat became a very important way for the upper middle class Parsi to say that they were well off. As opposed to the fact that, poorer people can't eat as much protein as we can, kind of thing. So, what evolved out of this ultimately was, sadly, this idea that the entire cuisine was non-vegetarian. This is something that's actually happened in less than the last 70 or 80 years.
Wow.
And not before that. And somehow this is also the fact that when you have an important function at a Parsi place, you will have all the major non-vegetarian food groups. Red meat, white meat, fish, eggs will all be present. And that's the idea of celebrating. you'd invariably go to a Parsi house to celebrate or to a wedding.
Yeah.
And you think that, they have wall-to-wall non-veg.
Right.
Whereas most Parsis would eat vegetarian food regularly at home because for everything there's only that much meat that your system can take before it shuts down.
Yeah.
So also,
though I must step in here and say that my father-in-law's definition of vegetables is potato. Like if I've eaten potato, then I've eaten my quota of vegetables.
It's legitimate. So half of India lives that way. If they've eaten potatoes, they're done. But, so many dals, sabut dals are cooked by Parsis in the evenings. Chana dal, masoor, even the rajma that's come in now. And such dals are cooked normally in the evening with a cutlet or a patties or something on the side.
Yeah.
So there is a side dish that is non-vegetarian and there is a main course that is vegetarian. Or a bowl full of vegetables and a side dish that is non-veg to kind of help the vegetables go down. If the vegetables don't finish, then the mother of the house normally next morning dries out the sabji, cracks a few eggs and makes them all eat it.
Yeah.
So the paridu is basically a way of getting rid of last night's vegetables.
Yeah.
Subsequently very popular, but
that's led to so many interesting inventions with the paridu, right? I was reading this old Parsi book and I was very intrigued with this. There was this dish called bumla paridu, which was like dried bumla, and I went on about talking about it for so long and finally made it. And it was quite interesting. I've never
quite
had...
interesting is exactly what you have to say to it. Yes.
I couldn't mentally grasp the concept of having like dried bombil and eggs together, but and then I also saw there was one which was a khari paridu.
Yes.
Which was just like sounded so
That's
random. Like there's nothing in the cupboard, so I'll just like crush up some khari and put
But it's
an
like
egg
sali
on it.
paridu, exactly like that.
Yeah.
Nothing else is that. Dump the sali, crack the egg, serve the whole thing.
Yeah.
You got your carbs and your eggs in one single dish being cooked together, and it's damn good for old curry.
Yeah.
So you got old, slightly damp curry or slightly soggy curry. It's perfect for that. And remember, when all else fails, drizzle ghee or butter on it. So these are, Parsi fail-safes. I still remember my mother once saying, I would so like to eat a Malai paridu. And I looked at her and said, what? There's nothing like that. And she said, of course there is. So we had Malai paridu that day. And I was completely blown away. The bumla paridu we tried once, and I decided that this is never something I'm putting on the menu.
Yeah,
because
it's a very acquired
taste, very esoteric. The Malai paridu, on the other hand, was a yum taste. I realized it's an English dish.
Oh.
It's basically coddled eggs.
Yeah.
Where in an egg coddler, you put cream and you put an egg on top. The Parsis, of course, take it to the next level. Finely chopped kothmir marcho on top, dotted with little bits of butter, whole chilies stuck into it.
Oh, so there's butter on top of the malai
as
course.
Well. That's to cook the eggs. Oh. And then you bake it in a bain-marie. And it's a very tricky dish because if you overheat it a little bit, the cream splits and you get ghee paridu. Okay, which is completely inedible. But if you do it right, it's fabulous. And then I had an American client come down and say, I've come down to wrap up my father's estate. She was in her late 60s. And she said, I'm never coming back. So I'm going to call all my family and we're going to have one last shindig before,
Yeah.
Who knows if we'll meet again. And she said, would you do Malai Parida? I said, for 100 people.
Wow.
What the hell? Let's do Malai Parida. We did Malai Parida for 100 people. And I got order after order from her family. After that, because they couldn't believe how good Malai Parida could be. I would have to send my boy over to their house to cook Malai Parida.
Yeah.
Because you can't cook and send it.
Yeah.
So it backfires sometimes, You can cut your own foot off by, reviving the past.
So, you spoke about this British influence of like the coddled eggs. So, all Parsis think we're a little bit British.
We're more British than the British. Apri Rani, my dear.
Yeah, we wear jewelry with like the Queen's photo on it. And I remember I was gifted like Guinea earrings at my Navjot. And my favorite story is a client called me and she ordered dhandar. And I was quite curious because Parsi clients will not, unless it's a good occasion, they'll not call you and just ask, can you send one portion of dhandar? So I was very curious and I was like, auntie, is it someone's birthday? And she's like, yeah, it's the Queen's birthday. So I'm celebrating by having dhandar patio. And I was just like, which queen, like in the UK?
There's only one queen person. We never asked that question. Apri Rani, remember that?
Yeah. So that was super funny for me. But can you talk about like a little bit about our love for this Conti food that, Parsis seem to just love? And
so Parsis hobnobbed like mad with the British. we were some of the largest landowners in Bombay. We owned half the bungalows the British stayed in because they were itinerant, You'd come in for 3 years, 5 years. You're hardly going to buy a bungalow and furnish it.
Right.
So they, by default, hobnob with their landlords. And one of the ways you hobnob is over food. And out of all the Indian communities, perhaps the Parsis were one that had no food taboos.
Right.
So sharing food with somebody was not an issue. So we ate a lot of their food and automatically said, hey, we'd like to cook some of that food also.
Yeah.
So you women folks in the kitchen, talk to their women folks and figure out how to do this. And this is seen in so many Bombay communities. It's not just the Parsis. The Pathari Prabhus have an enormous amount of European cooking in their food. In fact, Lakshmanbhai Dhurandar's book.
They make something like prawn pie, which I don't understand how.
Bumla pie, prawn pie.
Yeah.
And Lakshmanbhai Dhurandar's book actually has a lot of recipes for cake and things like that.
Yep.
Because you'll have guests coming home for tea.
Yep.
What should the young lady of the house make for them?
Yeah.
So, these kind of influences are very interesting colonial influences on food.
Yeah.
For example, our lagannu custard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Parsi baked custard, an egg and milk custard. You can't go wrong. The British baked custard, but the Parsi element is the Elchi Jaifal.
Yeah.
So that Elchi Jaifal completely puts it on a different level from being a stodgy, plain milk and egg baked custard.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we reduce the milk because we like it rich.
Yeah.
I remember there was a time when a Parsi dairy didn't have double cream milk. We didn't make lagannu custard.
Oh, wow.
Because it was such a pain to reduce the milk. You just didn't get good milk.
I know someone who just makes lagannu custard with whole cans of condensed milk. Like they don't, why bother adding sugar? We'll just add whole cans of condensed milk into it.
That's a little extreme, but I'm sure that works for them too.
So, let's quickly also touch on the berry pulao. Now, the berry pulao is actually, there is an Iranian dish called zireshk pulao. But that is so far away from
There's no meat in the zireshk pulao. There's zireshk.
There's only zireshk and the rice. There's no masala, there's no meat, there's no kebab.
Okay,
so how did this come about?
So whether you like it or not, you have to grant to Britannia the fact that they invented the berry pulao. They then reinvented the berry pulao. So they used to regularly have invariably old Iranian ladies who came down from Iran with melamine cutlery and crockery for sale from their family members to others, and bricks of pressed zarekh berries that they brought down with them. It was a taste of home for the Iranian, migrant Zoroastrians. So I remember eating the berry pulao in its first avatar. My mum was in hospital delivering, I think, my brother or my sister. There was nobody at home to cook. And therefore, Grandpa and me went down one day to eat berry pulao. And Grandpa knew Kohinoor very well, and they would, regularly abuse each other fondly, which is something that I have never really understood. Yes, as Parsis do. And we sat down to eat the berry pulao. And berry pulao was yesterday's leftover mutton, which would be shredded and pan-tossed. Okay, so all that gravy and that meat would be pan-tossed with rice and a lot of zarekh berries, to add that sourness and sweetness, and then served with a birista of onions on top. That was it. I thought it was one hell of a yum dish. At some point, they figured out that they had a winner on their hands if they just adapted it a bit to chunks of meat. So they did chunks of meat, kind of hidden under the rice. They did the birista on top, and they fried the berries and put them on top.
Yeah.
There was even a brief period, and the guys at Britannia are going to hate me for this, when zireshk was not available in Bombay, when they used currants.
Yeah.
Red currants. But that I can understand, and that's something that you have to do. You have to adapt. So they adapted that dish brilliantly. At some point, those 3 little kebabs turned up around it, and the really tiny, goti-sized kebabs, but whatever. And that became the dish, and it became the go-to dish at the place. So it used to be a very iconic dish. I always still miss the older version.
Right.
I think the older version was, had a lot more going for it flavor-wise. But this is the version that's incredibly popular, and it gave a new innings to the entire restaurant, and it changed the way a lot of us make berry pulao now. So a lot of us have clients who come to us and say berry pulao, and say, okay, you get a pulao with zireshk and with, I normally make it with a little saffron in the meat, but that's
that's
to each his own.
Yeah. Cool. So, we spoke earlier in the show about one of the first conversations I had with Kurush, which was about salads. So I think it's a nice one to sort of wrap up. So I think the first time I spoke with Kurush was when I was trying to coordinate the catering for my engagement party.
Yes.
And I had just freshly come from New Zealand, and I was like, since we're doing Conti food, I want to have a salad, because that's the logical thing what to do, and he was like, okay, I'll sort it. And I was like, no, like what salad is this gonna be? So Kurush has this very nice pineapple chicken salad. But I'll let him tell you what exactly the salad is.
The traditional Parsi cannot comprehend the idea of a salad which is not completely encased in mayonnaise. If it's not mayonnaise, it's not a salad. To them, anything with a light dressing made up of raw greens is a kachubar. And it'll be dismissed sneeringly as ghaspoos.
Yeah.
So, knowing her family and the rest of her, realizing that she was a healthy eater from New Zealand and didn't realize the relatives were going to come and who would judge her very badly for a choice of, we told her to have the chicken Hawaiian salad, which is pineapples, chicken, gherkins, cheese, and mayonnaise.
Yeah. That was the first time I had cheese, just like fully shredded cheese and with chicken and mayo inside a pineapple. But it was very tasty. It is very tasty.
I keep leftovers to make sandwiches for myself.
Yeah. So, just coming towards the end, I just wanted to get your thoughts on, do you feel that Parsi food is, sort of close to extinction? Every now and then you will get these newspaper articles which will talk about, now XYZ Irani cafe is shutting down. All this history is dying away. Because personally, I feel it's in the last 5-6 years almost gone through a revolution of sorts. More people are talking about it. But what are your thoughts on it?
So every cuisine goes through ups and downs, number one. The Irani cafes did very little Parsi food. In fact, the ones that did Parsi food are still thriving. Cafe Military is now, sadly, the owners passed away and they have somebody else handling it, but they're still doing food. They always did food. Sasanian more or less always did food. They're still doing food. The others served a different purpose of selling tea and snacks and things like that, bakery products. And that niche market has shrunk in a huge way because the kind of people that they were catering to don't exist, in the workforce today. So the huge attrition of Irani restaurants was something that was kind of bound to happen.
Right.
But that sorted itself out. In fact, there are a couple of new Irani restaurants that have opened.
Yeah.
So there is hope for it, and it's definitely a genre that has enormous nostalgia to a lot of people. And I see a lot of young people at Irani restaurants. Depends on where they are and how willing to adapt they are too. So, I think they'll stand their own. There'll always be quirky Irani restaurants where the owner screams and shouts.
That's part of the ambience,
yeah, and that's what you go there for, right? And you go and try and needle him a little bit to see if he'll shout back at you.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So I realized that I did that when I was a kid.
My favorite part at Kyani is the rope which is hanging by the stairs, which you use. They've still not thought, okay, let's just put a handle on the side. No, you must catch the rope and kind of climb up the stairs.
Because the handrail would get in the way of the shutters.
Oh, right.
Then you'd have to have new shutters too. Too much expense, too much bother.
Yeah. So I'll just end with my final question. And this is something I ask everyone who comes on the show. So is Dhansak really your favorite dish? And if you had to have one last Parsi dish before you died, would it be Dhansak or would it be something else?
It wouldn't be Dhansak. I'm very partial to a good Dhansak, but it wouldn't be Dhansak. My last meal, if I was going to curl up my toes and die, and I had the chance of, eating my last meal, would be Dhan Dar Tareli Machi ne Kolmino Patio.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so Tareli Machi as well as Kolmino Patio.
Of course.
Yeah.
And lili chutney on the side.
Oh, yes.
Don't forget that. And vagar on my dar.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't put vagar on my dar, it's all over.
Yeah.
I will haunt you from the grave and whatnot.
Great. This has been really fun, Kurush. So thank you for coming over. I just loved listening to all your stories and learning a little bit more about our history and how it's, how it's helped evolve Parsi food today. So thank you so much for setting us off on our very first Not Just Dhansak episode.
Thank you very much, Perzen. It was a great joy to be here, and I wish you all the very best for this. I think this is a lovely idea.
Great. Thank you so much.
The most engaging and the most useful conversations you may have in your life are likely to be with your most challenging customers. Hi, I'm Ambi Parmeshwaran, and on this podcast, I will take you through my book, Sponge Leadership Lessons I Learned from My Clients. Packed with real stories about real people, but most of all, packed with the innumerable lessons I soaked up from some of the most iconic business leaders like Ratan Tata, Azim Premji, S. Ramadorai, Karsanbhai Patel, M. Damodaran, Dr. Kurian, and many more. Don't forget to tune in to the Sponge Podcast. Keep sponging to keep learning.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep, or lose weight, or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.